Recording.
That's important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Thanks for coming on a much needed rainy day. We have been very dry in Raleigh as well. This is probably better than the alternative. I had heard inches of rain, so this nice, slow, steady is exactly what our plants need. Um, I've been very lucky in my career, as John kind of outlined. I've been doing this public horticulture thing for over 30 years at gardens all over the country. And I came to the plant collecting side of things a little bit late in my career. I never thought it was something I would be as lucky to participate in. I've been on the receiving end of that, getting plants from other people and other uh, groups that were doing this sort of thing. So what I want to attempt to do today is kind of dispel some of the romantic visions that you get when you think about plant collecting. I always like to say that my first image of that, having read a lot of the history of plant collecting from decades ago, is you think about these guys in the 1700s traveling around the world from ports in England. Raping and pillaging native lands for rare and unusual plants, guys in waistcoats and pith helmets, and a whole entourage of tents and necessities that you might not necessarily need. So, I want to talk a little bit about some of like the nitty gritty of what plant collecting entails. Hey, okay. So the first question that needs to be asked is why? What are you collecting for? Are you looking for something that's lacking in your collections? Are you looking for something that's going to be the next encore azalea? Are you looking for something that's going to fill a niche or a gap in your garden? Are you wanting to partner with other gardens? What's the reason for doing these sorts of things? Why are you going to collect? Is coming up with that first. One of the obvious things and something that JC kind of founded some of his work on was looking for better plants for the nursery industry. And we still do a little bit of that today. There aren't a lot of new things left to discover. There's a lot more to share with other gardens. That's a whole nother lecture, but that's probably the first reason for doing collecting is looking for something that's going to be a better urban plant in our changing environments. And unfortunately, the other side of it is conservation, wanting to help conserve plants and plant material. And I've done a lot of that in my career, both locally and abroad. And unfortunately, plant collecting is not near as sexy as animal conservation. Plants aren't as touchy-feely as things like pandas or this is a Siberian tiger. It doesn't get the attention that it really truly deserves. And unfortunately, with globalization, with habitat loss, with climate change, there are a lot more plants that are threatened or endangered than invertebrates, than animals. 40% of all assessed plants are often red listed. Red listing is a way to categorize whether a plant is close to extinction, threatened, or severely lacking in its natural environments. And that's pretty staggering. That's almost half of all plants if you think about it. And it garners a lot more attention and interest in that sort of stuff. So plant conservation and public horticulture, these are the basic guidelines that we follow when we're setting up trips, when we start those conversations. Probably the most important thing because of that lack of attention to the plant world is increasing political and public awareness of the needs and importance of conservation issues. The other thing that's crucially, if not more important, is getting to share that information, share that plant material with people that don't have the staffing to go or the resources to be a part of something like this. Supporting reintroduction, potential reintroduction of these plants. I've done a lot of work with magnolias over my career, and there's an effort right now to do this with several different species of big leaf magnolia, growing them on, having enough to share with other gardens, and then trying to reintroduce those into some of their native areas. Another very important thing that I've participated a lot in is long-term seed and tissue banking and then sharing that material. So I've been on collecting trips where we've just gone to collect seeds of things that are then put into a germplasm repository to help ensure that that genetic material is always going to be around. And some things are more tricky than others, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And finding funding and resources to support all of that stuff. You can't do it without that side of things. I've been a member of the American Public Garden Association. John's involved with them too. And there's a subgroup of this national organization called the Plant Collection Network, the PCN for short. And the mission of the Plant Collection Network is to have a standardized method of curating and managing plant collections, a more widespread approach to help preserve that germplasm all throughout public gardens and promoting those professional standards of collection management. And they've been a very crucial part in a lot of conservation-focused plant collecting. There's also another group. Us plant people are really bad with our abbreviations of things. This is the Plant Collecting Collaborative, the PCC, not the PCN, to confuse things more. This is a group of public gardens that will get together and focus on things that are of need and combine resources so that I think what spurned this, I was on a collecting trip in Kentucky and literally crossed paths with folks from 4 other gardens that were there at the same time looking for the same things we were. And if we had emailed each other, we could have combined efforts and not had all the plane tickets, all the time off. We could have shortened the amount of trip that we're looking for and also reduced the impact of taking those plants from the same place. So that's why this group was developed. And it's very similar to the Plant Collection Network, but there's members that kind of overlap just to kind of confuse things and to talk about groups that are involved in this sort of thing. There's lots of collaborators that I work with and have worked with. I mentioned the American Public Garden Association. The USDA was a very important partner. Funding and staffing for that has disappeared as of late. The plant groups like Magnolia Society, Oak Society, Maple Society, they've become really important collaborators to help with collecting and conservation work. U.S. Forest Service came to the APGA a number of years ago and said, we've got lots of land to cover, but not the staffing and the resources to do conservation work. And there's been a relationship with the APGA Plant Collection Network and them for quite a long time. And there's other things like Global Tree Campaigns, Botanical Garden Congress International. There's a lot of groups out there that are trying to help fund and support these sorts of things. So as John mentioned, I've been in public horticulture for a long time. And early on in my career, I worked in places that were very focused on collecting and bringing new things in and helping with some of this plant conservation. The Holden Arboretum outside of Cleveland, Ohio, 4,000 acre arboretum, very collection centric and focused, were a big contributor into the plant collecting world. And I worked with some amazing people there that kind of sparked that interest early on in my career. When I worked at the Cincinnati Zoo, you'd think that would be more focused on animals, but they had a whole side of what they do that helps preserve plant species and wild places. It was called the Center for Reproduction of Endangered Wildlife, and they had a whole side of what they do that focused on that. I'm a big believer in giving credit where credit was due. I've been lucky to have a lot of people in my life that I've worked with that have helped kind of form that interest and that backbone of collecting and that sort of stuff. The gentleman taking a picture is Rick Lewandowski. I met him when he was at Mount Cuba, a consummate plantsman who's done a lot of work in the Southeast and helping kind of spurn that interest and passion for plant collecting conservation. The other is Ozzie Johnson, who I think just had a birthday. He's down outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I met him years ago through colleagues, and he's done some amazing things kind of internationally and really got my interest in that long ago. I was very lucky when I worked at Bartlett to get to meet some amazing people. That's Tony Kirkham on the left, who's the former director of Kew Gardens. and Bill McNamara on the other picture. Bill was the director of Quarry Hill Botanic Garden in California. He and the other gentleman did a lot of collection work in all throughout Asia. There's been books written about some of the work that they've done. And Bill and my boss in Charlotte became good friends. And he was in Charlotte for dinner and asked Mr. Bartlett, how come we don't have wild collected plants in your collection? And Robert asked me, how come we don't have wild collected plants in your collection? And that started kind of a whole chain of events that really got me interested and out into the field doing stuff. And lastly, just a few more people. That's Mark, the director of the Ralston, who I've done a lot of work with, Andrew Bunting on the end, Scott McMahon from Atlanta Botanic, and Dan Hinckley, and that's Ozzy, at a lecture many, many years ago at the Ralston about this very, very topic. And last but not least, Andrew Bunting, who I worked with at the Scott Arboretum, has been a long-standing friend of mine. My wife refers to him as my plant wife. He's the one that really got me started in the plant collection world. So that's enough of the kudos. I just have a lot of respect for those people that have kind of helped me get in that direction. So you're thinking about plant collecting, you're working with other gardens, and you're talking about maybe doing a trip. I'm a big believer in having a plan, and that's even more important when you're going to travel someplace and expend all those resources. Is what are you going to do? Having a wish list. What species are you looking for? Collaborators that have the same time frame to do these sorts of things. Funding for these trips. Where are you going to go, and what time of the year are you going to go? If you're collecting seed, you've got to be in those parts of the world when things are producing seed. So determining, I've done a lot of work in Alabama and Florida and into Texas, determining when things are going to be at the right time frame to collect seed can be very, very tricky. And getting to these places can be wrought with all kinds of hurdles and things to kind of trip you up. Obviously, traveling locally is a little bit easier than doing an international thing. And I'll talk about that in more detail. Kind of hard to see, but in the left corner over there, somebody that I traveled a lot with, Matt Lobdell, who's at Missouri Botanic Garden now, an incredible planner, had every day kind of planned out where we were going to stay, hotels and all that stuff, just so that it's a little bit seamless when you hit the ground and you can take advantage of your time a little bit more. Lots of resources to look at before you go. There's lots of compendiums of plants for different parts of the world. These were some resources that I gathered before a trip into Kentucky and Tennessee, just kind of helping look to see where things were and how we could get the most out of our time and different parts of the state. Where were there going to be opportunities for more things, and kind of narrowing those down, and then reaching out to those people in state parks and in some cases private property, and other groups like Audubon and other things to kind of help see if we could get access to those places. But first determining, are things on your target list in those areas? Here we go. I've done a lot of backpacking in my life. I used to run ultra marathons in a former life, and I love the part of that of getting all your stuff together. They call that shaking down. So you lay everything out that you think you might need, and then depending on how long you're going to be gone and how accessible your areas are, kind of triage and take the things out that you don't need. But it's very important to have everything that you're going to need where you're going, because it's not going to be easy to find some things in certain situations. I know it was funny. I've traveled to Vietnam, and it was easier to navigate that than it was rural parts of Alabama in terms of resources and cell phone connectivity and all that sort of stuff. But I like this part of a trip is planning on what you're going to need. And you got to have all your ducks in a row. You're not just responsible for your time when you're on these trips, but you've got other colleagues that have just as many things to do and are leaving the house on fire. So having that a plan and having your ducks in a row is super duper important. And it's really important to make hay while the sun is shining. A lot of times you're having to fly into places. You either have to be picked up or get a rental car and coordinate a lot of other people's schedules so that everything kind of lines up. You never know what the weather's going to do. It never cooperates. But once you get into the field, once you get landed and everything's kind of coordinated, it's really important to start doing work as quickly as possible. So a lot of trips that I've been on, we've got target lists, we've reached out to people, we've got permits where we need them in some situations. We know where we're going, we know where we're staying, but we've never been to these places before. So you see a lot of this, a lot of kind of dividing up and looking for things, standing around, kind of taking in your surroundings, looking at associated species, knowing that maybe you have GPS coordinates where things are, or in some cases you don't. It takes a lot of time to kind of do that part of things. So there's lots of communing with nature, being alone in your head, which I like. There's worse things to do with a career and to get paid for, but it takes a lot of precious time to kind of do those things. And to the untrained eye, what's going on? What are those guys doing? Walking around, stumbling around the woods in some cases. And in most cases, it's important to get pictures to document the plants that you come across. But everybody kind of has a job or something that they're good at when you're on these trips. It was good that I worked for a tree care company because I could bring things that could get us up into trees to get plant material. Kind of hard to see, but that's me on the right. And I had a throw ball, which is a tool you use to get a rope up in a tree. It's basically a bean bag with lead shot in it. It's very, very heavy, and you've got a line attached to it. I had mastered a technique of, we were looking for Magnolia pyramidata, and just straight above my head, you can see the big leaves of it, but they have red seed pods, and we would scan the canopy for the red seed pods. I'd see them, and I could throw the ball, wrap it around the branch, and pull the seed pod off. Down below me is my friend Andrew, who did his best to catch those before they hit the ground, while also avoiding that 5 pounds of lead careening through the air and threatening to knock his teeth out. Sometimes I would throw it at him just for fun. He was looking up into the plants. But there's a little bit of this, a lot of waiting, a lot of writing down, taking notes, things that you see, the associated species, things that maybe were not on your list. We take lots of pictures, we take lots of GPS coordinates. Every once in a while, the local population will come out and join us, and that's always kind of fun. There were two sister German shepherds that spent an entire day with us along this lake in Kentucky, and it was very hard not to scoot them in the car and take them home with us, but we relented. But everybody has a job to do. This is Todd Ronsville, who works for the National Arboretum Germplasm Repository, and this was a trip for Hemamelis, uh, uh, the red witch hazel, just evaporated out of my head. Oval, Ovalis. Yeah, Hemamelis ovalis. It's a red witch hazel that's threatened and almost extinct, but taking the GPS coordinate of everything that we came across. And that's really important if we go back the following year to get seed. This was a scouting trip, and we had herbarium specimens with GPS coordinates on them, and we could go straight to those areas and find those plants. Some cases they were there, some cases they weren't, and there were associated ones there, and everyone that we found. And it takes time and energy to do that. So there's a lot of living and learning with these things. And one of the things that we figured out is we spend a lot of time looking for things. It's really hard to see the seed, especially with magnolia. This is Magnolia pyramidata. It's a threatened big leaf magnolia species found in a very narrow band in the southeast. It's easier to see the flower. So we went down in late spring when this was flowering and did a scouting trip just to look for this. When we found the flowers, we took GPS coordinates, did that for 3 days. And then in the fall, when the seed pods came up, we could go straight to those plants, find the seed pods, and then go on to the next thing. Spreading the time out, it just was a better way to kind of utilize resources and time and energy. So I mentioned jobs. Everybody's got something to do. Herbarium specimens are a very important part of these trips. It requires a lot of extra gear to carry along, and there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can do the pressing in the field, or you can collect them, label them, and do them later. Best when you before you get back to the car and to your hotel. So Kevin Conrad from the National Arboretum on the left. That's Matt Lobdell again. Every plant that we take seed from or we're getting for scouting, we took herbarium specimens. You want the top of the leaf, the underside of the leaf, and a bud in some cases. You put them between these presses, you press them together so they're nice and flat. You write down GPS coordinates. Each plant has a collection number. All that information is there on the newspaper. And it's also, we're taking field notes and keeping track of all that stuff. It takes a lot of time, but it's very, very important. This is good for us if we go back. This is good for colleagues that might go back. It's basically a genetic fingerprint of this plant being found in those areas. I've been to universities and other places where they've got these that date back hundreds of years, and you go to those areas and those plants kind of still exist. So a very important part of the work that we do. And just more shots of that. Kevin had a really good method where he would put a label on them as we got them, put them in a bag, and we would just go throughout the day. When we got back to the car, we would press them. Matt would do them in the field, and that's going to come back to haunt us, and I'll share that in just a little bit. But there's kind of a close-up. You can see we've got a leaf turned over so you get that underside. Just a snapshot of that plant and what it was looking like and when we found it. And the really important work that's done is getting seed. So I've done a lot of work with magnolias. I've done a lot of work with oaks. Oaks are always kind of on a collection list because there's a lot that are threatened or endangered. And quite frankly, there's a lot of good oak species that would be better urban trees for landscapes. So we're interested in that and looking for that. And it's always great when somebody gives a shout out that they found something. This was a holly that was on our list in Kentucky, and we descend upon it like magpies and just start harvesting the seed and keeping track of that. GPS, field notes, all that stuff gets written down and recorded. Always fun when we find things that weren't on our list. This is Aristolochia, the Dutchman's pipe vine. You've got to be resourceful when you're in the field. We couldn't quite reach this from the ground, so we had to back the rental car up as close as we could to the tree and stand on top of the car to get those seed pods off. And I've got a picture of that somewhere, but I could not find it. So here's Magnolia pyramidata, and we really rely on local folks to kind of help us find these sorts of things. That's that red seed pod that's ripe and ready for those seeds to dehisce and give us that genetic material that we need. A big swath of this occurs in East Texas. Unfortunately, a good bit of the property in Texas is privately owned, so we had to work with a lot of local folks to help us get access to those places. One of these gentlemen here was worked for a timber company and knew all the local landowners, and there were several that were very interested in us helping preserve this plant and then reintroduce it to these areas. So we couldn't have done it without those kinds of collaborators. And then just more shots of seed. That on the left is a magnolia that was on our list in Vietnam that we literally stumbled across. This is a water Tupelo that had been on our list for years, and we finally found it on a trip. So it's always good and exciting when we find that germplasm that we can take back and try to propagate and share with other colleagues. So you've spent a day stumbling around the woods, the mountains, looking for plants, collecting things. The work doesn't stop then. Usually we're in hotels. If we're really lucky or fancy, we're at an Airbnb, a bigger house where we can cook and kind of spread out. And when you get back to your lodging, you've got to let that plant material kind of dry out. So every surface becomes a venue for that to take place. That's us on a trip from Kentucky. We've deloused and showered and cleaned ourselves up. And then we've started to divvy up and count things out. My wife always says that that looks like we're bagging up drugs. We've been out in the field and we're bagging that stuff up to disperse it and sell it. But it's funny. Everybody kind of gets quiet and gets in their own head when we're doing these sorts of things. On the right is kind of a good example of everybody's, pitching in to help with that. We're cleaning, we're bagging up, we're writing down data. Rhoda Maurer was a friend of mine from Swarthmore College. She's at Cornell. She is a GPS mapping guru, and she developed really good collection maps of every single place we went to, so that we could use that data and share that with other people that would in turn go back to those areas. But if you've ever cleaned seed, it's very laborious, it's very messy. We have come very close to destroying some hotel rooms because it's not always easy to do that, either a bathtub or a sink. But it's very important to get that seed processed as you're moving along to ensure that it's going to be viable so that it will grow. And you can see the baggies there have a collection number and the name of the plant on there, and all that stuff goes into notes as well. Lots and lots of redundancy so that you don't mess things up. A nice Hampton Inn, which is our mode of choice, where every surface has bags and plants drying out on it, and a bathroom in Vietnam where we're cleaning up some of the plants that we had collected for the day before we go back into the field again. A part that's very, very difficult and kind of hard to describe is when you're traveling through the states, there are some restrictions of plant material from state to state. When you're overseas, those restrictions are much more tighter for obvious reasons. You don't want to bring in the next kudzu or the next gypsy moth. There are some things that aren't allowed to be sent or collected. There's pretty good lists of that stuff. And sometimes I've been on trips where that list has changed while we're literally in the field, and things that we collected were on a no-fly list. So you have to get things inspected when you're overseas by a government entity there. Once you clear that hurdle, you have to get them boxed and shipped. And this was on a pretty successful trip to Vietnam. We had jumped through all the hoops to get things collected. And Scott McMahon, who I traveled with from Atlanta Botanic Garden, had years of relationships working with those people. So we went to all the right places. We had some things pitched, but we had lots of stuff that came through. When we went to ship this stuff, this was in Hanoi. It was well over 100 degrees. We came in, they turned the AC off, they shut all the doors and windows, and it was instantly a sauna while we were doing all this processing. It took hours and several trips back to the hotel to get paperwork that they all of a sudden needed. It wasn't easy, and they made it as difficult as possible for us, which makes traveling within the United States much more conducive and productive, I think. There aren't as many hurdles, there aren't as many chances for things not to work out as that. So this was just a partner that we worked with that was interested in some plant conservation work, and we spent a couple of days with staff from there. I mentioned a lot of work in Alabama. This is a forest management area in southern Alabama where we had done a lot of work with magnolias and also oaks. And one with Auburn University, right outside of Birmingham, where we had some very good success with some oaks and some other things, and some nature conservancy property in Alabama as well. And just very lucky to work with some amazing folks. Todd from the National Arboretum and Rhoda from Cornell. If you want to be sure that you won't see any snakes, wear some snake protection. We didn't see any snakes on this trip till the very last day, but you never know. This is that group of folks from Texas that helped us find kind of what we were looking for, and just great to travel with like-minded folks that are doing really kind of good unheralded work. And some of the other benefits of that, not just the people, but getting to see things like this. We were in Florida looking for some Magnolia pyramidata and stumbled across this whole field of these pitcher plants in full flower. And you never know what you're going to come across. I think it's some kind of logging equipment way, 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 way back into the woods in southern Alabama. but that's that's the icing on top is when you find what you're looking for. We're on the tail end of a trip in Mississippi and had found zero seed pods. Had spent almost a week, and we had one GPS coordinate that was 2 hours away, and it was our last day in the field. And we're like, we want to drive 2 hours because we haven't found anything yet. So we did, and we get ready to turn down the road and we finally get there. And it was along a power line and it was solid red with seed pods. So we had waited all that time before we found any seed. And if you look at the picture on the left, the seeds are starting to actually dehiss and come out. So that turned into a very successful trip, luckily. And there's some more of it there. Um, One of the spots that we've been to quite a bit in Florida is Torreya State Park. There's a conifer Torreya taxifolia. This is the only place that it's found in the States anymore. There's a handful of species left. Atlanta Botanic has GPSed all of them and are doing work to try to reproduce both from seed and cuttings and also restricting access because it's very susceptible to Phytophthora, but Magnolia pyramidata and Magnolia ashii are also found there, and those are also species of concern. So I've been down there many, many times looking for and helping with those projects. And this was on the beginning of one of the scouting trips I mentioned, where we're getting our gear together, we're looking at the GPS coordinates, and we had very good success on that trip as well. One that's new that we're working on is Hemimelis ovalis. This is the red witch hazel. It was rumored to not even exist, or they thought it was another species, but this is one that has been of great interest to me and lots of other gardens, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail. Uh-oh, don't want to do that. Did I turn off the sharing? I don't know what I touched. Yeah. Sorry about that, y'all.
I'm sure it's just having a fit. Should be good.
Okay. Very important. Okay. So I mentioned living and learning. As with all things in life, there's great lessons to be learned by doing things incorrectly. Those are the lessons that you will always remember. And this is where the less than romantic side of plant collecting really raises its lovely head. So this was one of the first trips I did for Magnolia pyramidata. We're in southern Florida in August. It's very, very hot, very, very snaky. This is our first day in the field. It rained all morning long, so we were soaking wet. Um, we had lots of gear, probably way too much than we needed. Anytime we'd stop and we'd find a tree, we'd throw everything on the ground. Matt was diligently taking his herbarium specimens at every single plant, all his stuff on the ground. At one point, somebody said, "What are all those little red dots running around on the yellow of the herbarium protecting cover?" I had a lot of tree climbing stuff, thinking that I could stop at each tree, climb it, and magically get all the fruit. That didn't work out so good because it was very, very dense. and welcome to the world of chiggers. I had never had them my entire adult life, and I've spent a great amount of time outside. We were covered from head to toe. Matt, it turned out, had the most severe reaction, and it turned out he was allergic to mites. Chiggers are mites, but we didn't properly treat our clothing or our shoes or our gear. Luckily, I was working with Bartlett. I had an entomologist. I told her my sad story, and she just laughed. And she helped me figure out the best way to kind of treat my clothes. And knock on wood, I have not had to deal with that ever again. But it was unrelenting. This was probably the biggest lesson that we learned was scouting is the way to go. You've got time on the front end, but it really saves that time when you're out in the field when it's hotter and the weather's more iffy and the wildlife is a lot more active. You can go straight to those plants that you saw earlier and find the seed pods that you're looking for. The near and far side of things was one that I learned early on. It's very fun. The stories are better. The experiences are better when you're traveling across the world, but you're traveling across the world and 20 hours on a plane, coming and going and all the stuff associated with that. There are a lot more layers to traveling internationally and hoops you have to jump through that aren't so easy and enjoyable. There's getting there, 20 hours on a plane. There's a very wide difference in culture and food and those sorts of things. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. There's a lot more paperwork with visas and passport stuff. I had to have a whole slew of vaccinations on my first trip to Vietnam. I was on malaria medicine the whole time I was there. That gave us very lucid dreams and figuring out when things are going to be at their peak is much more difficult. We had people on the ground there saying that this is a conifer that was high on our list. It only occurs in this very small part of Vietnam. The trees are easy to find because they're enormous, but the cones are up very, very high and well above my tree climbing capabilities. But we had word that they were dropping cones, and when we got there, we didn't find any. So we didn't get to bring any of that home, unfortunately. Um, the cultural differences are not always easy to navigate. The livestock use the main thoroughfares to travel around, so that kind of slowed things down a little bit. Um, they also use them much differently than we do. This gentleman is in his scooter, and it's kind of hard to see. Anytime a car would pass, I'd get really anxious and think somebody was going to hit that board that was sticking out all the way over in the other lane. It also rendered it useless trying to get around him. But the chainsaw that he had on the back of that was running the whole time that he was on there. And you could see the chain kind of moving around as he was sitting there. So if nothing else, it's good fodder for stories. But what an amazing opportunity to go somewhere that very few people will ever be able to go to. We're in the northern part of the country, on the border of China, where there's still tribal lands. And we had to have visas to go there. We had to meet with government officials when we got to our sites. And because they were tribal properties, we had to meet with tribal people as well. And that takes time, but I think it's crucial and important on lots of fronts. The educational side for us, but also the respect to the people that live there, that you were doing something that was trying to help preserve plants and animals in parts of the world where conservation isn't always the first thing on a lot of people's minds. The terrain is much harder to navigate over there. There weren't easy access points to get to some of these places. Sheer limestone cliffs in some situations. And this is me stopping short of the gentleman that was clearing, because a couple times when he was cutting stuff with his machete, it came loose, free of his hand, and went shooting down the trail towards us. So I was giving him a little bit of space. Lessons learned. But again, amazing the places that we were. This is Scott McMahon, who has been a multitude of times, and we had just spent hours hustling and cussing to get up this no switchback trail. And he said, everybody stop what you're doing and just turn around and look behind you. And we're welcome to that amazing, amazing view. In some cases, we're going in and coming out in the same day. And others, this was a halfway point where it just didn't make sense to go in and collect, go all the way out, go back to the little town that we were staying in. So we spent a couple nights in this four-star bamboo shack where we had carried up food for a few days and had our sleeping bags and stuff. Um, these are some of the people that were with us. There was a gentleman that lived up there that would that actually cooked us some very nice dinners the 2 nights that we stayed there. But just beautiful, beautiful views, amazing opportunities to be in some of these places. Always get excited when we find magnolias that we're looking for. I'm a long time member of the Magnolia Society, and this was one that was hot on our list, and we're lucky to stumble across it. Um, you can't see it in this picture, but they were using these rooftops. They grew a lot of marijuana up there, and they were using these to dry that off. We could smell it way before we got up there. But you can see that a lot of the jungle has been clear cut. And these are two scientists that work for the Vietnamese Academy of Science that were taking us to some areas where some rare begonias had been, and we happened to find them, which was very, very lucky and get to bring those home with us. That's Peter Zale from Longwood Gardens and Scott. And the thing that people ask about probably the most, and the layer of travel is what do you when you eat when you travel? I'm the type of person that I didn't want to be that American that was only going to eat certain amounts of things. I'll try anything once within reason, but you kind of have to go with the flow when you're traveling. And we actually ate very, very well in Vietnam and some of the other places that I went. We stayed in a very small town and went to different areas from there. So there was a restaurant next to the hotel that we stayed at, and each night the woman that ran the restaurant would make us something different to let us experience what we had. The picture on the right is just a bowl of pho with chicken in it. That was our breakfast every morning. Unbelievable. Really, really need to take advantage of the regions you're in because who knows when you'll get back. What we brought in the field wasn't as appetizing on the 10th or 11th day. This was just rice, glutinous rice. Sometimes it had chicken in it. Most of the time it didn't. And it was wrapped in banana leaves. But it was very gluey and hard to eat. We were very much tired of it by the end of the trip. The picture on the left, that's Dr. Zhu, one of the Academy scientists, who had this thing of meat in his pocket that I stayed away from because it had been in his pocket the whole time that we were hiking. And I respectfully declined and ate my glutinous rice very happily. You can take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the boy. When Scott and I ended the trip, we flew to and fro together. When we cleared customs, when we got to our gate in Hanoi, the first thing he did was plop down in Burger King and get some comfort food. I mentioned collaborators, and this to me was an interesting one that Scott's been developing. Fauna and Flora International, they primarily deal with conservation of animal life, but they realized a number of years ago that if the animals don't have plants that they exist with, those two things are not going to succeed. So they've started to really do a lot of plant conservation work, which is encouraging. One of the things that they really look at are orchids. There are a lot of primates that interact in the same forest where orchids occur. And Peter Zale, who was on that trip, is one of the leading orchid experts in the country. And again, just beautiful, beautiful places to travel. So some of the fun and games, some of those dispelled myths. It's hot when we're in the field usually, and I've spent a lot of time in the southeast. I grew up in Alabama, so I'm used to the heat. I don't necessarily like it anymore as I get older, but this is literally walking out of the car, getting my pack out of the back and shutting the door and instantly just being, it was very, very warm. The Solon-Dixon Forest that Auburn University managed, they had these cold springs. So we would go out and collect and we would end our trip here, just getting the body temperature to come down just a little bit. Remember this? That's always looming in the headlights and always on the forefront of my mind. Part of getting to these places is you spend a lot of time in the car traveling. This was the halfway point on a 9-hour car ride from Texas through Louisiana, from Florida through Louisiana to Texas. You have to do stuff to help keep yourself awake, and I'm not immune to doing those sorts of things. You never know what the weather's going to do. This is Torreya State Park. It took a direct hit from Hurricane Michael a number of years ago, and I partnered with Atlanta Botanic to go and check all those GPS coordinates where we had magnolias and torreya to see how they weathered the storm. And plants are incredibly resilient. It took us hours to get to some of these points because the trees were in all directions. And the copperheads were not happy about us being there. We saw a lot of snakes that morning. But this is Matt taking some field notes. And you can see behind him, there's a flower of Magnolia pyramidata. This tree was completely crushed by a large oak tree, but it's already sprouted up and producing flowers, which is very encouraging. On the witch hazel trip that I went on, the most recent one is this plant has been found in Alabama, Mississippi. There's GPS coordinates in Louisiana, but nobody has actually seen it there. So we spent a trip going through Louisiana and into Texas, and we had some GPS coordinates, and this was an hour into a drive on a Forest Service road, and another mile or two down the road is where the coordinate was, and we couldn't get to it because there was a tree across the road. So despite your best efforts, sometimes this sort of thing that happens. Another one in Texas, I mentioned a lot of the property is privately owned. This was on that Hemimel Solvalis trip. And the day before we flew out, we got word from a colleague on the ground that said they just started clear cutting the property. So that ridge line was full of Hemimel Solvalis and ones that had different color ranges, different leaf sizes. So incredibly important plant genetics there. So we spent half a day surveying that hill with our GPS coordinates, and in some cases finding nothing, and other finding plants that have been bent over, and we dug up a bunch to bring back and try to grow. So this is how we roll in most situations. This is your standard government issue Ford Escape. There were 4 of us crammed in there with all of our traveling gear, with our change of clothes and suitcases and computers. And it's a little disconcerting when you park that on the side of the road and walk a couple hours into the woods and hoping that nobody will come in and take all of your stuff. That's never happened, luckily, but not comfortable conditions at all, especially if it's hot and you're sweaty and muddy and buggy and all that entails. And the other thing I get asked about a lot is the flora and the fauna. Everything's bigger in Texas. The picture on the left is not real, but just for scale. The picture on the right is. I don't like grasshoppers and I don't like roaches, and that thing was enormous. I have a proclivity for bears and snakes in my travels. Again, just to kind of highlight that they do exist. These were signs in Torreya and a couple of other places in Florida that we were looking for magnolia and oaks. And you do stumble across them, and they're an animal that doesn't like to be bothered. In a lot of cases, they won't move. This was on a adventure in Mount Mitchell here in North Carolina. I had stopped to take a picture of the mountains behind me, and as I was putting my phone back in my pocket, that was right between both my feet on either side of my feet, and was very lucky that I didn't disturb him too much. But it pays to kind of have your head on a swivel. Mostly the harmless varieties are what we come across. This is that new spider that everybody's freaking out about. This is in Florida. It's basically a big daddy long legs. They're not going to bite you, but they are toxic. About that big, I think. And usually they're right at face level, so you get him on your face as you're walking, and I'm usually the one that's in the front. These are the murder hornets that have been on people's radar. This was not a picture that we took, but they do exist. We saw them in Taiwan. We've got our own band of flying, stinging things in the United States. Um, I am particularly tasty for our local fire ant population, but it's always fun to introduce those to my friends that don't have to deal with those in northern gardens. But the icing on the cake, when it's all kind of said and done, you've spent time in the field, you've done all this, you bring things home, you ship things from international locations, you sow them in a greenhouse, and things start to come up. That's when you realize that you've done something super important, and then you see these plants in other gardens growing from seed that you had a hand collecting. This was a hydrangea that Scott McMahon had collected from seed. It was on a list of things that we asked him to look for on one of his trips, and brought seed back. And this was a plant that we grew from that seed. So what's next? Some of the government shutdown stuff and budget cuts have put a lot of things on hold, unfortunately. But the witch hazel is something that I'm still very much interested in. And with some garden colleagues, we're kind of planning what's our next thing to do. But I think it's an important one. It's a really beautiful plant. And I think there's some potential here from a plant introduction standpoint too. Some of the colors were absolutely amazing. Some of the sizes of the petals were just stunning. So preserving this germplasm to reintroduce it into the wild, but also maybe get it to introduce into the nursery trade. These were some of those witch hazels that have been clear cut, where we dug up root suckers, bagged them, put collection numbers on them all, GPS coordinates, and they all went back to the National Arboretum, where they are currently growing on. And once they are of size, we'll probably get some at the Ralston, and I might solicit some people to grow some in other local gardens, so that all of our eggs aren't in one basket. But it's always good to gather and travel and do these things. I've developed great friendships in locations and also with the colleagues that travel. It's a special thing to do. I think there's a lot of more work that we could do here in North Carolina. This is Linville Gorge off to a distance. There's a lot of incredible diversity in our mountains, and it's not that far to travel, and we're familiar with a lot of locations. But that's something that's high on my list of areas to look into. And they have magnolias there too, which is important to me. That's it in a nutshell. If I've raised any hackles or you have any questions, that's the best way to get a hold of me, the email. But thanks for coming, and thanks for your attention. What's that?
Particular magnolia.
The Magnolia pyramidata is one of the most threatened of the big leaf magnolias. And it occurs in a lot of locations where there's other threatened plants. There's a lot of oaks that occur in the same place. There's another big leaf magnolia, Magnolia ashii, which is also threatened and endangered. So going to places where you can get more bang for your buck has been very, very important. I've been a member of the Magnolia Society for many years on the board of directors. My former garden in Charlotte had the biggest collection of magnolias in the world. So my boss was very interested and helped fund a lot of that stuff. So it was just kind of a natural fit. Andrew, who I showed pictures of, is also a part of that. Matt Lobdell, who I showed pictures of, is a part of the Magnolia Society. So, and magnolias are hard to preserve the germplasm because the seeds are fleshy. They don't keep like an acorn or other things. It's hard to seed bank that. So it's important to grow those on and have that plant growing kind of outside of its natural area. That was a good question. Yes.
If one of us wanted to grow that magnolia into the stand farm in our yard, is that a possibility?
It's harder because they're threatened or endangered. There's restrictions on both collecting them and growing them on. A lot of that is having staff to make sure that they're being taken care of, keeping track of the data of those plants. So usually it's public horticulture entities, it's other gardens, it's other arboreta, it's other research facilities. Those are kind of the first places. That's not to say that once those numbers get up to where things aren't threatened anymore, then you can kind of see more of that. So Magnolia ashii is a good example. You can find that in some mail order nurseries. And it's a threatened species, but it's easy to propagate. A lot of people have it in existing plant collections and public gardens, and a lot of nurseries have started to grow it because it is easy to grow and you get that kind of big tropical foliage. You know, the first witch hazel that I bought, Ovalis, I bought from Fairweather Gardens, which was known for witch hazels. They had one that they had propagated and sold, but it was the same germplasm that other gardens had. So increasing that diversity is the first step, and then making it available for the public. Yeah.
The boardwalk and Peril where the Bartram is, there's one planted out in that area.
I went from a 300 plus acre arboretum to 11 acres, and I still have all these connections, but I don't have places to put these things. So people that have more, you've got to have a staff that's going to take care of the plant record side of things, that's going to preserve that it's not going to get ripped out for a house or a trail or fiber optic. It's those things that kind of dictate where they end up initially. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, it's always been in the periphery of my career. There were folks at the Holden Arboretum that were world-renowned plant collectors, and I got to work with them as a young person right out of college and working at different places where that was a part. And not every garden has the resources to send somebody into the field, but they might have space in their garden. They might have a herbarium where they can take one of those herbarium specimens. And a lot of that stuff does get passed around to other gardens. But I think it's even more important now today to kind of keep the pressure on and keep doing those sorts of things. My friend Todd, who works at the National Arboretum Germplasm Repository, lost his entire staff. So he's taking care of all those plants by himself. And he sent out a call this spring saying, I've got a greenhouse full of Magnolia ashii that's from this one place where it's completely gone now, and I can't take care of it. So we mobilized a bunch of people and took a lot of those plants and divvied them up to other gardens. I've got some that I need to give him. So it's very, very important to continue doing this sort of work. Anybody else? Thanks, y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Jump in and pretend I know what I'm doing. Exactly.
Yes, you're recording. No.
How it's, you know, some of the